Welcome back to my channel. My name is Dr. Anwar Youssef Dunbar, and this is Big Discussions 76, Science and Technology. First of all, please like this video, please share it, and please subscribe to my channel. Well, I am back this time with another guest, as you can see, and it's a guest that I am very, very excited about. We've been talking about this for weeks, and joining me today is Raphael Perrino, who is a senior intelligence and business analyst for Virgin Galactic Orbit. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And Raphael's going to tell us a little bit about what that is. But before we jump into everything, I want to say that I got my space shuttle here.
Awesome.
The reason I got this from the museum too, down in DC. So the reason this interview is exciting for me, number one, is because I've sat and I've listened to Raphael speak in awe before, and I'll tell you how we know each other. We're going to talk about that. But also for my channel, this is exciting because up to this point, it's been mostly pharmacology and toxicology, and in large part, this has become the coronavirus channel. So because that's what's been happening and dominating the news cycle. But now this is exciting because it takes us into a whole new orbit. And so with the name being science and technology, there's so much more besides pharmacology and toxicology and the coronavirus. So Raphael, welcome. I'm glad you're here.
It's great to be here, Anwar. Thank you.
Okay. So we we talked about what I was going to ask you. And for those of you who, over on my main channel, or should I say my original channel, I actually interviewed Raphael's father, Ralph, who is a veteran educator. We had a fun discussion about education and those kinds of things. So we're going to start, Raphael, with your start. And if anyone wants to go watch that interview with Raphael's father, Ralph, I'm going to leave that in the description box below. But so, Raphael, I know you're from Arlington, Northern Virginia.
Yeah.
But can you talk a little bit about what it was like, your childhood, and what it was like growing up in the household with a father who was an educator, and I believe your mom has an education background as well, but just two parents who are really passionate about education and getting you and your brother Pietro on that educational road. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. So yeah, my mom and dad, both educators. My mom taught theater in Fairfax County Public Schools for 34 years. My dad is an adjunct professor work for quite a long time at Northern Virginia Community College. Also owned and directed Northern Virginia Tutoring Service for 22 years. So both my mom and dad are very much involved in the education sector. I was very fortunate growing up, and as was my brother, we were really given the opportunity to be able to experience educational type of situations outside of the classroom. So I can recall very specifically at about age 6, my dad brought me to the Arlington Planetarium, now the David M. Brown Planetarium, and we were there for astronomy for families. Steve Smith was the director at the time, and I thought it was a really awesome experience. I was really inspired by the night sky. Growing up in Arlington, you don't see quite as many stars as out on the countryside, and so the ability to be able to see a full night sky with a couple thousand stars, maximum of 6,000 roughly by the naked eye, is really an awe-inspiring thing for a child to see. And the programming that comes with it is certainly something that is inspiring for kids and adults as well. But it definitely captured my imagination. Around that same time, my mom and dad sat down with me to watch Carl Sagan's Cosmos, and we watched the full 13-part series. It was kind of caught on the retro. It originally came out in 1980, but PBS re-aired it in 1990. And so we got out the VHS and recorded each of the episodes and rewatched them. And it was really a great way for the family to bond, but it was also a great way to be able to expose my brother and I to space, the awe and wonder of the universe, and to encourage that.
Okay. Well, one of the things me and your father talked about was, and this is a part of my own personal narrative, is that the household you come from matters. It won't necessarily inhibit you from becoming or block you from becoming who you can become or your potential, but that start and what you're exposed to early definitely matters. And so what's interesting is when I talked with you and your father, and as I had gotten involved in the David M. Brown Arlington Planetarium, I was amazed at, again, my backgrounds are in pharmacology and toxicology, and we're often labs doing research and stuff. And it just amazed me that there was this whole other galaxy of science that I was not privy to. And I'm a Gen Xer, and so I honestly don't have any memory of Cosmos in my youth. And that's not to say that it was obviously on, but you can grow up in the same time frame and have access and exposure to different things. Okay, so I'm assuming, well, I won't assume, but in terms of education, your father being an educator, did education in your studies, did that come natural for you? Did you have any challenges earlier, or were you just a straight A student?
Not straight A all the way, but I know that my mom and dad really encouraged me and my brother to do our absolute best in school, study hard. And if any troubles occurred, they were more than happy to help out and to make sure that we had access to tutoring. So I always felt supported. I know that some of my favorite classes when I was growing up, I really enjoyed my science classes. There weren't really any astronomy classes when I was growing up, but there were courses that related to it, and it was kind of the scientific method and the appreciation of that scientific method. I think is something that is a great thing to instill in kids early, because it's all about exploration. It's all about formulating and testing your hypotheses, and what better way than to explore the universe and to explore science. And so, my science courses were really fun. I enjoyed those. I really enjoyed my art and history classes as well. I really enjoyed all of my courses. I mean, I was really lucky to go through Arlington Public Schools. It's a phenomenal school system. Patrick Henry Elementary School, Jefferson Middle School, and we ended up moving before I went to high school. But my experience in Arlington Public Schools was fantastic. I have a lot of teachers to thank along the way. And I think that as a kid growing up, you can be exposed to experiential learning outside of the classroom and have that additional ability to be able to learn. And through the planetarium, that certainly happened, and through many other activities as well, like going to museums and visiting historic sites, and you're going to planetariums all over the place, really, doing stargazing, things like that. Those are things that spark that interest in kids in the sciences. And but in addition to that, I was really fortunate to have great teachers who encouraged me and really kind of challenged me in a way that enabled me to do better and to become a more science-informed adult. And now I'm actually out there in the industry doing what I dreamed that I would be doing when I was a little kid.
Okay. Well, me and you went and participated in a career science night on behalf of the Friends of the Arlington Planetarium. And I was amazed that your teachers, they remembered you, and they lit up when you walked into the room. So you clearly made an impression on them when you were a student. What's interesting, as I was getting ready for this interview earlier, I was thinking about the planetarium, and I was thinking that, again, that early exposure is so critical because, when you're a kid, sometimes you're taking courses and you don't really know why you're taking them. For example, back in my hometown of Buffalo, I went to our one of the top 2 high schools in our city, and it was our only technical high school. So we had majors there. We had technology majors. And I did not understand at that age why do I need to take trig? Why do I need to take calculus? Why do I need to take computer programming? And if you have that exposure, okay, there's a space program, and there's a lot of calculus and physics that goes into just putting a rocket in space, much less putting people on the rocket to go into space.
Yeah.
That kind of fills in the why. So I think that early exposure is very, very critical, because otherwise, in some instances, you can wonder, why do I need to know how to do this later on? So.
Yeah, I agree on more. And I'll say that, when it comes to mathematics, and I initially was a physics major when I went off to James Madison University, I did struggle in mathematics. It's something that I think that we all have our strengths. I think there are multiple paths into the aerospace industry. So had I kept that physics, mathematics route, I would be probably in a very different position in the aerospace industry right now. I think my strengths were in writing. My strengths were in kind of my appreciation and understanding of science, and also in the arts as well. So I kind of merged all these things together and found kind of a circuitous path into the aerospace industry. But I say that because there is hope for those students out there, that maybe they're not quite as strong in the sciences or in the maths, but an appreciation of it and a willingness to be creative and to find other ways into the space industry if that's their goal. It is very possible. There are a lot of folks in this industry, in the aerospace industry, that do not have a hard science background. That's not to dissuade people from going into the hard sciences. I think that we need more, but it's also to say that there are other ways in, and you can achieve that dream. You just gotta get creative.
That's very interesting. Okay. I mean, because the assumption is you have to be a calculus wizard, or
That I am not.
what's his name, or a Stephen Hawking,
Right.
to get into aerospace. But the fact that you said that, clearly not. And interestingly, the same thing is true for medicine. I've talked to medical doctors who said you don't have to be a biology person all the way through to get into medical school, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so you went to Patrick Henry.
Yeah.
And, just briefly, your high school journey to college. Were you taking general courses in high school, or were you taking more science-focused courses, or before you got to James?
Yeah.
Or George Mason?
Yeah. So to James Madison University. Yeah.
Okay, James Madison.
Yeah. And before I do, I should also make some shout outs too. I wanted to say hello to Mrs. Hammond if you're watching, Miss Bovino, Ms. Shaw if you're watching, Mr. Wilson. I had a lot of amazing teachers at Patrick Henry Elementary School, so I had to make sure I made some shout outs. There are others too to thank. I thought I would highlight a few. So moving on to high school, I had some really phenomenal courses there. I did focus some of my AP work around the sciences. I know that I took a great course by this was Mr. Sabin at McLean High School. And it was an AP Environmental Science. And that really opened up my eyes to the environmental science field in a way that really had not before. Reading Rachel Carson's Silent Spring for the first time, just really understanding how science affects policy and vice versa. That was a great course. I had 11th grade physics with Dean Howarth, and Dean also has been involved with the planetarium. He does great historical reenactments, and this is very much in character, because I can remember in 11th grade, every quiz that we had, every packet for homework that we had, it always had these cool illustrations like Galileo and Newton and all sorts of different astronomers and physicists and the mathematicians over time. He really made it fun for us. I think we even had a pumpkin chucking event out on the McLean High School football field to demonstrate parabolic motion. So he really brought science to life for all of us. Dean's definitely one of my favorite teachers all time. But ultimately great courses, and really helped to reinforce my love of science. Because at that point I was already really stoked about space. I really loved it. But to have teachers who were helping to reinforce that love of the sciences, I think that was crucial. Many other great teachers along the way as well. But I did have some great coursework there at McLean High School. But moving on to James Madison University. So my initial goal was to be an astronomer, be somewhere in the hard sciences, maybe a physicist with a focus on astronomy. And I did that for about a year at James Madison University. What I found was it wasn't quite the strength that I thought it was. I think I had taken on a challenge that well, ultimately sometimes you have to pivot. And I found that there was another major out there called Technical and Scientific Communication. And so it was a major that always kind of required a description statement, because it's a lot of things in that major name. You don't tend to hear technical and scientific communication as a major. And what it ultimately enabled me to do was to pick up a couple different trades and merge it with passions. And the trades were in technical writing, technical editing, design, specifically graphic design, and a little bit of web development and publications management, proposal writing, science writing. And so you would ask, perhaps, how does that connect to the space industry? And the connection there is that I was able to focus all of it around astronomy. Every single project that I had a chance to relate back to astronomy, I did. User manuals, user studies, technical editing of NASA documents. I think at one point I took Einstein's general theory of relativity and formatted that document using, I think we were using RoboHelp, which is a very common technical editing tool. So just taking the kind of the very kind of job ready type skills that would come with tech writing, tech editing, and meshing it with that love of astronomy and space. They enable you to do that, both at the undergraduate and then at the graduate level at James Madison University. It's now the School of Writing, Rhetoric, and Technical Communication. It merged with the Writing and Rhetoric department. And many of those same courses are still available in technical communication. So it's a great hybrid option. We always build it as kind of a hybrid major, where you could take folks that were interested in multiple disciplines and enable them to be able to create something a little bit new and unique.
Okay.
So that was ultimately what I did at JMU.
Okay. So we're gonna the next logical point would be to jump into your current career, but let's go back to the Arlington Planetarium. But before we go there, I want to say again, teachers matter, and it was a seventh grade teacher that got me interested in biology, and it's coincidental that you took physics in high school. In the 11th grade, that's when I had to take it in my high school. And I struggled early on with it because I think I didn't understand the fact that there were formulas for most of the questions they were asking us. So it was very quantitative. But once I got it, once I turned that corner, I remember my teacher coming in. I mean, I didn't finish with an A average, but he realized I kind of turned the corner, and he said, you know what, I want to congratulate you on the progress that you've made in this course. So I'm saying that to say that teachers matter, and having the right teacher matters to help you either get excited about something or to help pull you through or pull you out of the rut that you're in a particular course.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. And so it sounds like, in terms of, we're going to come back to your current career, but it sounds like your training is highly involved writing. Learning how to write. And I want to say that that's an important part. Whichever science discipline you get into, there's going to be a lot of writing and communicating involved. So let's go back to the Arlington Planetarium, because you mentioned Dean Howarth, and in my mind, I kind of made the connection between art and science, because so for everyone watching, there's a planetarium in Arlington, Virginia, and that's how I met Raphael. And I met his father first as a tutor, but his father, Ralph, said, you might make a good board member for the Friends of the Arlington Planetarium. And so I started collaborating with this group. I became a part of the group, and there's a whole board of us. Raphael was on the board, Ralph was on the board, and we would hijack the planetarium one weekend out of 8 months a year, and that allowed me to meet some very, very extraordinary people. And in terms of marrying art to science, Dean is a bit of an actor, and he puts, depending upon what the theme of the weekend was, he would put on costumes, and he would literally go into character. I think the one I remember the most is Tycho Brahe.
Yeah.
But there was a weekend.
The gold nose.
The gold nose, yeah. But there was a weekend when you went into character with him as well. There's one weekend you played Carl Sagan.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And so So if you have a local planetarium, support your local planetarium, get involved, and take your young people, if you have young people. And so Raphael, I wanted to ask you, and you alluded to this and you discussed this a little bit already, but I started going to the David M. Brown Arlington Planetarium when I was an adult, but you started as a child. Just describe that a little bit more. I mean, what was it? Were the shows? I know the shows are digital now,
Yeah.
and everything's been updated. But what was it like watching the shows at that age?
Yeah, I remember as a kid, you notice kind of the weirdest things. I remember one of the things that caught my attention the most when I first walked into that planetarium was that my white sneakers and t-shirt lit up because there were all black lights throughout the planetarium. And as you walk into that facility, and I'm so glad they kept it intact after the renovations that occurred, but along the curvature of the planetarium, the interior and exterior curvature within the planetarium, there are these grandiose hand-painted masterpieces, really, of galaxies and nebulae and supernova explosions and planets, spacecraft and science fiction. It's a really wondrous mural display. There's another place that has a phenomenal mural display like that as well, at the National Air and Space Museum downtown. It's pretty close to actually it's one of the side entrances to the building, but massive murals like that are really just wondrous and soaring. It can really capture the imagination, really, of anybody, particularly a little one. When you're first growing up and you see something like that, that's really captivating. So I remember those murals really being exciting. And we walk in there, and then there's this spidery-looking optomechanical Spitz projector at the center of the room, and so I remember seeing that and seeing that moving around, and that was really pretty cool. And it had all sorts of little reflectors on it and little gizmos and gadgets that would kind of flicker and move around. Very much a mechanical projector. It was from 1968. I believe it was on the roof of Washington Lee High School before the planetarium was built, and they brought it in there and installed it. So this thing operated for I think about 40 years or so. And it probably could have kept on operating, to tell you the truth. I mean, they would just need to replace the bulb on the inside of the optomechanical star machine projector every couple years or so. So there was a physical bulb in there, and there were physical pinholes around this around the sphere, and that would project the stars onto the dome. And that was really cool to be able to see as a little kid, because really I had not seen a night sky like that before. Growing up in Arlington, the Washington, D.C. area, even in the 80s and in the 90s, but particularly today, you're going to see probably about maybe 10 or 15 stars up there. But you're missing out on thousands of stars. And in a really dark sky, you're missing out on faint echoes of galaxies and nebulae, and the arch of the Milky Way moving across the night sky overhead. So to see that in a planetarium was really, really inspiring. Now, the other part of it is the actual technology they were using at the time, and it was slide projectors. I remember there being two banks of slide projectors. So this is really 60s, 70s technology. It was being used in the 90s and everything before. Even up until about a decade ago, there were still slide projectors that were projecting onto the dome. And for those who remember who went to the planetarium before about 2011, that's what was there. And there was a whole system powered by a Hercules module that was a computer behind the console. When I was a little kid, there was a reel-to-reel tape that would provide the audio. Eventually it moved to Laserdisc, and then I think eventually it moved to CD-ROM. And now I think it's completely digital. It's a click of a button. But I remember having to start the shows, and you'd have to time everything. You time the reel-to-reel with the key combination to get everything started all at the same time. We would use laser pointers to be able to point things out. We would use there was one pointer we had that was kind of a white arrow, but if you moved it fast enough, you can make it look like a meteor. It didn't really look like a meteor probably, but it was the intention. There was a flip for a supernova, a switch for a supernova. There was a switch for a nova. Of course, a nova being a little bit less brilliant, at least in terms of luminous output, than a supernova. It all just kind of typically worked. Every now and then the projectors didn't quite work, and you'd have to stop the show and go up there and work with the projectors and troubleshoot it. Maybe get the planetarium director to come over, but more often than not, everything worked. And it was really a retro system that was there for a long time, which still conveyed the science. It might have been a little bit outdated in terms of the actual way that it was being conveyed, but you still had current science that was being discussed in those shows, whether it was by slide or by something else. And I remember one of the most inspirational shows to me was a show called In Search of New Worlds.
Mm-hmm.
This came out in around 1995 or so. This was around the time when the first planets outside of our solar system were being discovered. And when I was a little kid, let's say when I first saw Cosmos and first went to the planetarium, the number of confirmed exoplanets out there were exactly 0. By the time that In Search of New Worlds came out, there were around 4 or 5 planets. It was PSR 1257 with a bunch of other alphanumeric characters that I can't quite remember because exoplanets tend to have code associated with them in their nomenclature. But there was also, I think, 47 Ursae Majoris, definitely 51 Pegasi. This was really just the cusp of exoplanet research. For many, many years, astronomers had tried to confirm exoplanets, and there were a lot of false positives over the years, of the decades prior. And then suddenly there was this boom, and there was this use of the radial velocity method, which was really pioneered during the late 80s and early 90s and is still used today. There have been other methods that have been used since, transit photometry, gravitational microlensing, all sorts of different ways to observe exoplanets. But it was those first few that made it into that program. And the way they talked about, so here's what happened. So there was this, they were talking about actual worlds that were being detected and the possibilities that would come with that of potentially habitable worlds, and connecting that to the vision that Sagan and other science communicators before had espoused, this idea of there being multiple worlds throughout the universe. There was a connection between the dream suddenly to the actuality of here's hard data that we can point to, and to connect those two things in a young mind, I think is pretty exciting when the data meets the dream. And I'm sure that a lot of astronomers felt that way, that same way as well. So that's what it was like, volunteering at the planetarium when I was growing up, attending the planetarium when I was growing up. It was an older system, but the science was current, and it was a great source of inspiration.
Okay. So I think this is an appropriate place to say, hey, to acknowledge or shout out the friends of the David and Brown Arlington Planetarium, Jonathan, Mary, and Bill, who run it on the weekends, because there have to be people knowledgeable on the machinery and the technology to actually run the full dome show. So it's a large production with a lot of moving pieces. And I just want to reemphasize, I have a PhD in pharmacology and a background in toxicology, but listening to some of the speakers speak, like Heidi Hamill and I believe it was Natalie Batalha, Jared Espley, and just listening to some of these people talk about astronomy and astrophysics, and it for someone even for another scientist in another discipline, it's awe-inspiring. And listening to one of your lectures, Raphael, I was sitting there just kind of like, wow, this, So before we jump into your current career, is there anything? Oh, I have one question. So in terms of discovering the exoplanets, was the Hubble telescope, for the most part, responsible for looking into other solar systems?
So I know that Hubble has been used to be able to verify some observations. I know that a lot of the heavy lifting, at least in recent years, although I think it's now been decommissioned, it's reached the end of life, the Kepler telescope, and the number of planets, candidate planets and confirmed planets is the lion's share of confirmations. We went from, before Kepler, you had Spitzer, you had the Keck, you had a range of other telescopes, ground-based, as well as Spitzer, which was space-based, that were conducting observations, and we were kind of in the hundreds. It was when Kepler went up, the number of candidate planets went up into the thousands. So an extraordinarily successful mission, really by any measure, in NASA and other space agencies really around the world. It really enabled us to be able to boost our view of the population of planets that exist out there. And statistically, you can It's been they've been done many times, so you can extrapolate from Kepler's findings because they're looking at a very narrow slice of the Milky Way galaxy, a few thousand light years into the galaxy. And if you were to extrapolate from that, the census of the full sky, which I think the test mission right now is doing, you could see on the order of upwards of about 1 trillion planets orbiting other stars in the Milky Way galaxy. So we went from something where when I was a kid, it was thought that the solar system is pretty unique. Our own solar system, this is probably it. We don't have any observations to be able to confirm otherwise. There were exoplanet astronomers who weren't able to, didn't have perhaps the right tools or methods at the time, and they were continuing to explore and hadn't quite made those first confirmations yet. And we went from that to today, where it's, I think we're around 4,000 or 5,000 planets that have been, or that are at least candidate planets. Haven't seen the recent count because the count is constantly changing, which is a wonderful thing. But if you extrapolate from that, you've gone from a unique solar system to a fairly common solar system in a sense, with the exception of the Earth. We don't know if there are actually other habitable planets in the Milky Way galaxy. Only statistically speaking, there should be. But in terms of the sheer count of planets, it's absolutely abundant throughout the Milky Way galaxy. And there are 150 billion other galaxies. So allow your imagination to run wild.
Yep. What's interesting is, by sitting and listening to those talks, I was able to, because as a pharmacologist, you have a background in chemistry and physics, and you take those courses at some point. But I didn't know that they were able to determine which elements. I thought it was fascinating that they were able to determine which elements are on other planets and other systems just by looking at the absorbance spectra.
Right. Yeah.
Because every element on the periodic table has a specific, unique absorbance spectra.
Yeah. If you look at the spectral signature for on those planet atmospheres, and this was really pioneered by Dr. Sarah Seeger. So the concept here being, if the planet is transiting, and by transiting means, for those who are watching, if the planet moves in front of the star, you would measure the combined spectral signature. So how the light looks when you split it out into a spectrum. You can tell what the elements are in that combined light. And when that planet moves around to the back of the star, or at least moves out of the field of view, then you would measure the light, you would measure the spectral signature again. Subtracting out the two, you should, if it's a one planet system and you've deduced that it's just one planet that's causing this, you should be able to determine what the composition of the atmosphere of that planet is. And if you were to know other parameters, like let's say the minimum mass, which you would get from the radial velocity method, you would get the volume from the transit photometry method. You combine these things, you can start to understand the density of the planet. Understand that the density tells you roughly what the planet is comprised of, because we know the general density of various objects throughout the universe. You can tell the density of water, you can tell the density of rock, and you can really deduce a lot of information without actually imaging the planet specifically. You can tell a whole lot of information about that planet. And as we start to get more and more powerful telescopes, we'll see more and more surface imagery of these planets. So there won't be quite as much deduction as I was just describing. It'll be a lot more actual direct observation with some deduction as well. That's going to be really exciting to get those first those first detailed images of atmospheres and surfaces of planets. We have images of exoplanets right now. Fomalhaut B is an example, but they're typically kind of reddish yellow dots orbiting the star. It'll get more and more detailed as we move along.
Okay. And the James Webb hasn't gone up yet, has it? Or has it?
Has not gone up yet. I think it was a little delayed. Most recently, it had some delays associated with the pandemic. But I think that they're targeting 2022 for their launch.
Okay.
It might be 2021, but I think it's 2022. And that telescope, they think, will be able to do some of this type of imaging that I'm talking about. Probably of larger planets, perhaps more Neptune or Jupiter mass, but more direct imaging of the actual planets themselves.
Okay.
It'll have a primary mirror of about 6.5 meters. I think Hubble's around 2 or 2.2 meters. So you're going to have a whole lot more angular resolution involved with a much broader surface area associated with that larger primary mirror. So it's going to be a really powerful telescope to be able to see deep into the universe, to see those first stars and galaxies being born after the epoch of reionization. But you'll also have the ability to be able to see exoplanets and planetary systems being born and all sorts of amazing things that that we've wanted to be able to observe for a long time in greater detail. And I think that's what's always wonderful about putting larger and larger telescopes up, more powerful telescopes each time. You typically will discover things about the universe that you didn't anticipate discovering.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Hubble did multiple times, and I'm sure that's what Spitzer did as well. You put something more powerful up there, and you have to test your hypotheses a little bit more, test your theories, and see if the evidence that you see with that greater lens into the universe matches. And perhaps adjustments need to be made, and that's what science is all about: is adjustments and refining and consensus, and that's the beauty of it.
Okay. Well, before we go on, one more, is there any part of astronomy or aerospace or astrophysics that fascinates you the most? For me, it's time dilation. The fact that when you're out in a non-gravity environment, time moves slower and you age slower than if you're on the surface of a planet with gravity. Is there anything that particularly just says, wow, that's amazing? Or
yeah, absolutely. So, I'll fully admit I'm not as well versed in special relativity and general relativity as I am in exoplanets and some other areas of astronomy. But I certainly have some good recommendations of folks to speak with that will be able to jump deeper into that topic. So I wouldn't want to dive too deep. I know that at a high level, yes, I mean, everything in the universe exerts a certain amount of gravitational influence, and that larger bodies, things like larger planets or larger stars, or even a black hole, is going to exert more and more and more gravitational influence, really in 4 dimensions around that object. Yeah, I think that's absolutely fascinating as well. I can't speak to it as extensively as I'd like to, but I want to make sure that I stick to what I know. Okay. That also fascinates me as well. And ultimately for me, I think that the search for life in the universe, the search for potentially habitable worlds, that's one of the areas that just that fascinates me extraordinarily. The superstructure of the universe, the expansion of the universe, just how that's changed over the past 20, 30 years, that we really have pretty much nailed down the age of the universe. We're down to about 13.82 billion years. And that's pretty extraordinary. Of course, in my lifetime as well, we've gone from a universe that was expanding to a universe that has expanded at an accelerated rate, which was something that was discovered through Hubble, through the standard candles of supernova, distant supernovae. And so, and I can imagine discoveries like this will occur also with Webb telescope and successive telescopes in the future. But yeah, the search for new worlds, potentially habitable worlds, and really the superstructure of the universe, and the movement of the universe. That's what fascinates me the most, if you're asking.
Okay. All right, Raphael. So we're down to about 2 to 3 more. We have about 20 minutes left. Okay. From a very high level, and you can get as specific as you want, but talk about what you do now.
And actually, before we do that, I also should I should make a segue here too. So what I do now is with Virgin Orbit, and I'm now in the aerospace industry. But there was a gap that occurred between when I was at James Madison University and where I am right now. And that gap, I worked as a technical writer for a couple years, and wasn't finding my way into the aerospace industry directly from that work. But during that same time, though, the planetarium was going to be shut down. And so what I did was I really kind of used my tech writing and design work and understanding of social media to be able to contribute to a group, which Anwar, you've been a part of for many years here. And we banded together to save the planetarium. And we did this over the course of about 15 months through the help of the Arlington community, the help of philanthropists, but also through the help of $5, $10, $20, $30, $50, $100 donations. Over that course of time, we had, there were benefit concerts, we had nights at the planetarium. There was this great, community that just kind of wrapped its arms around the planetarium to help save it and to bring it back to life. And all of that old equipment that I was talking about early on, it's all replaced with I think it's a dual projection system with so computerized with LED lighting, brand new seats, carpeting, brand new dome, and a brand new library of shows.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Friends of the Planetarium was able to do. Was able to raise money for the full renovation of the planetarium. And we continue today to raise funding for the planetarium, not necessarily for a complete renovation anymore, but we are continuing to be able to purchase programming for the planetarium so they can always have new shows. We help out with teacher training in Arlington Public Schools, providing them with the ability to be able to go off to conferences and get additional exposure to their field and to the sciences and mathematics or the STEM fields, while also teaching. And we also have a scholarship for students we put out each year. This is through the Arlington Community Foundation. It's called the
Mm-hmm.
David M. Brown Planetarium Scholarship. And ultimately, we're just trying to give back as much as possible because we think the planetarium is a crucial asset for STEM education in Arlington and the surrounding region. It's a great source of experiential learning for children, enabling them to be able to get exposure to the sciences from a young age. And we think it's a great community resource for families to be able to come and learn about the night sky and understand the universe and appreciate the universe and come together. So I'm looking forward to, once this pandemic is over, this whole getting back into the planetarium again and enjoying the night sky there. In the meantime, I know that we're working on digital programming to be able to continue some of that for members. So during that time, helping to save the planetarium, I really got interested in kind of space policy, kind of that connection between changing public opinion at the administrative level with the passion for space. And also got involved in a campaign to save the Webb telescope. The Webb telescope was going to be defunded around 2011 or 12. And so we created a grassroots campaign to be able to build a public voice for the Webb telescope to see that funding restored, which it was. Happy to report I think it was a really important, it's still a very, very important asset for NASA and for the whole aerospace community. It has been for a long time. So very eager to see that go up into space and conduct its observations. But there was a connective tissue between that real excitement about space to the interest in tech writing and kind of trying to make it through that route and then ultimately finding space policy as another way to do this. So through space policy, I found the Space Policy Institute at George Washington University. And I was really fortunate to have Dr. Scott Pace as my professor. Dr. Pace is now he's the head of the National Space Council for the United States. Dr. Pace was just a phenomenal professor. And I had a lot of great professors at George Washington University that really helped me to sharpen that interest in space and in policy, and to branch it off a little bit further, specialize it a bit further. And that's what brought me to really kind of interest in cost and schedule analysis, interest in kind of the data analysis end of the industry, which maps over to what I'm doing right here today. Virgin Orbit is where I'm currently working. Virgin Orbit is based out of Long Beach, California. We do all of our tests and operations out of Mojave, California. And a lot of the build type work is being done in Long Beach. And so to get there, I really needed to build my understanding of data analysis, data science. I needed to build my understanding of venture capital and how that relates to the space industry. And so that is really some of the work that I'm doing for Virgin right now. As a senior business intelligence analyst, I am working on understanding the market of small satellites, but also understanding kind of launch cadences, how we expect competitors to launch, how frequently we expect them to launch. Also in the process of refining, after having built a scoring model to be able to understand various competitors, the investor landscape, to understand opportunities and contextualize that into the maturity of the company. And so there's been a lot of great opportunities to be able to kind of merge all of these various interests, whether it's space policy or whether it's tech writing or whether it's design, whether it's data analysis, into one career opportunity. And if it sounds a little bit circuitous, it is. It was really kind of a combination of lots of different passions and skill sets to get there. But I should also speak briefly about what Virgin Orbit is doing. So we're separate from our sister company, Virgin Galactic. And for those of you who are listening, you've probably known about Virgin Galactic for longer than you know about Virgin Orbit. Galactic has for some time been working to develop a revolutionary, cutting-edge suborbital tourism capability, in which you would bring the White Knight to aircraft up to about 40,000, 45,000 feet. And you would drop Spaceship 2 from that aircraft. Spaceship 2 then ignites several seconds later. And then eventually it reaches a point where it's going straight up into space. It gets up to about, let's make sure I get this right, about 80 kilometers, I believe, 85 kilometers. And at that point, you're really able to see the curvature of the Earth. You're able to see a brilliant night sky, and you're weightless about 15, 20 minutes or so as you descend back down to the Earth. So that's Virgin Galactic. That's our sister company. And they have other ideas as well. I know in the news recently, they've been working towards hypersonics, which is really exciting, and moving perhaps cargo across around the world at hypersonic speeds. So that was really the precursor to Virgin Orbit. Virgin Orbit originally, the idea was to take our launch vehicle, Launcher 1. We were going to launch that from that White Knight 2 vehicle, and that was going to be sent off to space. We found was that it was more efficient and more cost effective to ultimately retrofit a big jumbo jet 747, whose code name was Cosmic Girl, before it was a Virgin Orbit plane. And we have been able to reinforce the left wing of this aircraft and strap roughly a 70-foot 2-stage launch vehicle rocket, liquid propelled rocket, under that wing. And so when you get up to about 30, 40,000 feet, you would drop that rocket, and then after about several seconds, it would then boost up into space. It's not sending people up. Virgin Galactic is sending people up. At Virgin Orbit, we're sending payloads up. Oh, wow. And so the idea there is to send small satellites up into space to replenish big constellations that are planned, to be able to provide responsive capabilities for military, to be able to do all sorts of great things that would come with a very flexible launch system. So launch for a very, very long time has been, with the exception of really one vehicle, which was by Orbital ATK, which has been around since the early 90s. They also did a horizontal launch system. They had the Pegasus XL, which is down the central part of the plane that gets dropped. It's a solid-fueled launch vehicle that would be sent up into space. They sent about 250 kilograms up to space. Virgin Orbit, we're planning to send about 300 kilograms up to sun-synchronous orbit, which is a very common orbit in this industry. And we're doing it liquid fueled. We're doing it for less money. And we're trying to make it more cost efficient for customers, and really provide that responsive capability. But for a long time, I kind of skipped over a long time, when you've seen a rocket launch, let's say you saw during the Gemini program and the Apollo program, or even during the shuttle program, or the Antares program with Orbital, or Rocket Lab, for example, or SpaceX. All of these are vertical launch vehicles. They launch from the ground up. You can imagine if you were to get above a good portion of the atmosphere, above a lot of the turbulence, there's nothing downrange, in coordination with the FAA, really you're able to choose kind of the inclination you want to launch to. You can choose all sorts of things because your launch pad is now mobile. Wow. And if you were to bring that capability to multiple countries, then you're ultimately not having to set up launch pads at multiple countries. Instead, you're just bringing the launch capability to those countries. And so that's what this horizontal launch capability is all about, is flexible, responsive launch around the world. So that's the company that I'm working for right now. This is a really cool mission, and I'm excited to see us reach orbit for the first time. I know that we had an orbital attempt around Memorial Day this year. We got a lot of great data from that, and our engineers are really excited to get those data, and we're excited to reach orbit really soon.
Okay. Well, what I've gleaned from everything you just said is that most people in the general public, we see the rocket launches on TV and we see the missions, but there's a tremendous amount of planning and strategizing, securing funding, and organization that goes around those launches and those activities that we see on television.
Yeah, absolutely.
Probably years of planning, right? I mean, meetings and simulations and all kinds of things.
Right. Yeah, it really starts with simulations. So, I mean, for a really novel system like this, where it's a liquid-fueled, horizontally launched system, that is something where you have to invent new things. You're ultimately inventing new areas of the aerospace industry just in order to be able to do that. And in the landscape we're in right now, it's really about private financing. This was a shift that occurred really within the past decade or so. I led a study when I was at my first space job was at Bryce Space and Technology out of the Washington, D.C. area. And Bryce, we created a report in conjunction with NASA, and then have continued it onward since, called Startup Space. We were tracking venture capital in the aerospace industry. And in the early 2000s, even the mid 2000s, the amount of VC money we're talking about in the order of the tens of millions, a couple $100 million. Whereas today, and really since about 2015, we've seen anywhere from about $3 to $5 billion of private venture capital and angel investment, private equity, debt financing, all sorts of different instruments going into private space companies. This has been enabled by the miniaturization of satellites, and with that miniaturization, the reduction in costs, which has enabled private investors to be able to enter the landscape with lower amounts of capital than previously necessary. You're talking late 1990s and early 2000s, put up a satellite system. You're talking tens, at least single digit or tens of billions of dollars to be able to stand up that type of operation. Whereas nowadays, you want to put a constellation up, it might take you tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars. That becomes more accessible to private investors. And there are a lot of different dynamics that occurred to be able to enable this. The success of SpaceX very early on, the success of a couple of very high profile launch vehicle providers and other providers of space programs and assets. It's been an exciting time to be a part of this industry. There's really been an enormous shift. And I've been going on for a bit here, but I wanted to kind of illustrate the landscape.
Yeah. So we're just about at the end, and I'm going to say, for context, for those of you, for the lay persons watching who are unfamiliar with the term venture capital, what that's referring to, and Raphael, please correct me if I'm wrong, but that's looking for dollars, basically, looking to see who's willing to invest in these projects, aside from the federal government. Yeah. So which investors out there are willing to, and who are eager to invest some money in these companies, because these rocket launches and these projects don't come out of nowhere, and they need funding.
Right. Yeah, and depending on your sector within the aerospace industry, there are going to be various levels of capital that's necessary to be able to get there. A launch company, it's on the order of hundreds of millions. For a big mega constellation, it might be a couple billion. For a smaller IoT, which is Internet of Things, or M2M, machine to machine, those type of constellations, you might be talking about tens of millions or hundreds of millions. For a strictly geospatial analytics company, perhaps even less. So it really makes it accessible to those private investors that are interested. Venture capitalists, they're all about taking on risky potential endeavors. Only 3 out of 4 VC-backed companies actually end up succeeding, which would seem astounding. You could think, they're putting all these hundreds of millions, billions of dollars into these companies. Wouldn't they expect a lot of them to succeed? That's not the case. For a VC, they're expecting to see about 1 out of 10 companies succeed. You make 10 bets and one of them really works out, you see a massive return on it. It wipes out all the other losses from the other companies. And so that's the idea, is to ultimately be able to pick the right companies to invest in. Do your due diligence, and the more you're investing, the more rigorous the due diligence is. But yeah, just private investors placing private capital into private companies. And perhaps, one perhaps goes after public contracts as well, and works with private companies. So, but the initial investment perhaps is very much private.
Okay. Well, Raphael, we could go on for hours. I could ask you questions and we could go on for hours and hours and hours, but we have to wrap up. So you have to come back.
Would love to.
All right. So the final question here, from a general sense, in a general context, can you talk about some of the skills necessary to start a career in aerospace?
Absolutely. It really depends on what you want to do in aerospace. Right now, I'm doing business development, data science and analytics. To go down that path, my recommendation would be to really beef up on coding, things like Python, R, try and get familiar with programs like Tableau, but don't just know the languages and the platforms that you're working with. Also, kind of, it's good to get the kind of the theoretical knowledge of use of those. I think this is where going off to a university and getting exposure to different topics, different disciplines, I think is really crucial, because it enables you to apply those very kind of tactical knowledge sets of coding and be able to apply that into a career. So I'd say down the data science path, get the theoretical and kind of overall domain knowledge of that aerospace industry, wherever you want to go. And then also get that tactical knowledge that enables you to be able to do things like the role data science necessary to crunch large data sets and be able to extract key findings. If you're interested in going kind of the policy route, there are literally programs throughout the United States. MIT has a great program. George Washington University has a great program, the Space Policy Institute, where you can study policy and you can work on Capitol Hill on space policy issues to help influence, either for private companies or for various other organizations and associations. You can influence Congress to be able to fund certain areas of the space industry that are of interest to your organization. If you're interested in going kind of the professorial route, that certainly is wide open as well. You could be teaching space policy, you could be teaching space economics, you could be teaching spacecraft design, you could be teaching all sorts of other areas that you could do within the academic field and publish and continue publishing into various journals. Let's see, you could certainly go the route of the hard sciences as well, which is really what I think is absolutely, all of these different disciplines are crucial to the aerospace industry. But we don't send things up to space without those who have the mathematics and science background. So getting a background in propulsion, getting a background in electrical engineering, in avionics, in quality assurance testing. There are all sorts of different areas, and that's really within the launch sector. But in terms of satellite design, there are all sorts of different systems that you'd want to learn about through an engineering background, through a system engineering background, through a physics background. If you're interested, really, again, going back to the academic arena, if you're really interested in that, I mean, it's obviously launch and satellites aren't the only way to go. You could also go, purely into astronomy and astrophysics. And with that, I would take more of kind of a physics path and try and make sure that you're publishing, attending conferences. I would say for all of these fields, the blanket statement I would make is get involved in professional societies early on in your academic career as you're moving into your professional career, because it gains you access to a network that you can leverage as you're moving through your career. It enables you to perhaps publish, but it certainly enables you to meet people who may be senior to you, who can give you advice and mentor you, and just gets you out there in the industry, to be able to understand what the trends are, where things are moving. That's the general advice. I think from that, I hope that everybody listening knows that there are many, many different paths. I didn't even list all of them, but there are many different paths in the aerospace industry. But keep looking up, keep dreaming, and work hard and study.
All right. I mean, we're here to learn. And so as much information as we can get, the better. So Raphael, are you on social media? If someone wants to ask you a question, is there a way to tweet you or anything? Yeah,
sure. Yeah, I do have a Twitter account. It's Raphael Perrino. So just RAPHAEL PERRINO. That's my Twitter account. I'm happy to take questions and connect.
Okay. All right, everyone. Well, we will stop here. Raphael, once again, you have to come back because
I'd love to.
There was more I wanted to ask you, but we're both have full schedules here. But Raphael, thank you for coming. I hope this is as fun for everyone watching as it was for me doing the interview. I definitely want to have Raphael back again. This was big for my channel as it launched us into a whole different galaxy. No pun intended.
No pun intended. Yeah.
But yeah, we're gonna stop here. Please like this video. Please share it, and please let me know if you have any questions or comments in the comment section below. And as always, remember, we will talk to you the next time, and your attitude determines your altitude. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.